And the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Father God, thank you for being the kind of God who hears and answers prayers, for being who you are and how you are. You are the God of true love, life, joy, and peace. Thank you, Father, for being you and the opportunity to pray, to speak to, and listen to you. Thank you, Lord. Please, God, forgive me for my sins, both those I know I've done and those unknown, that I failed in not knowing that I committed them. Please forgive me. Please, God, bless this message. Let it be an honor to you, my Heavenly Father, but also to my earthly father, my earthly mother, and in some ways to myself. God, let this message be void of the evil one, Satan, the devil, the hater, the liar, the thief, the destroyer, and the murderer. And I ask all these things in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless. Mark Anthony DiBello. Today is June 29th, 6th. Let me double check. I think it's 24th. I'm sorry. June 24th, 2026. This is a life update. I'm only going to leave it to a half an hour. I'm going to leave it only to a half an hour. I've got to be stringent in that. I've left hour-long and if not longer messages before, which can be found on my YouTube page. You can also go to markanthonydebello.com, click on the projects tab, and go to a cult of one, or now a cult of none, and it discusses the dishonor and the deadly sins and crimes against my daddy, and the dishonor of him, and also the dishonor of my mom, and certainly myself. But above my mom, well, actually my dad, my mom, me, is Father God. Dishonor to him. So again, I'm going to just try to give updates. I, this is going to be June's message post Father's Day. I know I haven't been leaving them, at the end of the month, and I apologize for that, but there are some important updates to give. And you'll see I left some space up here if I have to put an insert or a placard of some sort. I can tell you now, going to insert a audio recording of a phone conversation I had with my daddy. It lasts about 3 minutes and maybe 4 minutes at the most. And it's going to be reflective of why I'm leaving these life updates and things that need to be done in the way of truthfulness and justice for my daddy and even my mom, and just godliness and goodness moving forward, and to eradicate the evil that was perpetrated by this one female in particular, her followers, because she was a cult leader in many ways, cultishly, gaslighting and grooming and brainwashing my daddy through manipulation and a lot of deceit and things to that effect. And then also those who betrayed him, and it was those closest to him. In fact, I can't think of anybody. There was one gentleman who reached out to try to help and mediate between my dad and this evil woman he was with. But this gentleman ceased contact with me, and he was hesitant about doing it anyways. And he definitely wasn't really doing it for me. He was doing it to honor my dad, which I understand, and that's fine. As long as my dad was served by it, that's all that matters. But really, anybody else, friends or family, I don't think of anybody I know that really reached out to me, other than I did know a female who reached out after his funeral asking if she could help. But beforehand, nobody. They were all actually, in a sense, they were teaming up against my, God first, my mom, deceased, my dad, and me, in being, believing her. This woman who committed this, used my father, a typical gold digger scenario, but also very abusive. But, they ended up, siding with her against my own daddy. You believe that? The man, gave them birth, life, everything. And then certainly against me, because they've all been really, in a way, I don't want to say like, derangement syndrome, but, everything I do or say is, to them, is ungodly, untrue. I mean, and self-serving or whatever, and selfish and greedy, and none of that is true. I mean, it's not hard to discern that. But again, these people do it because either they're ungodly, especially the females, and that's the way it's been since the beginning of time. Satan, disguised himself as a snake. I mean, who wouldn't be smart enough to know, snakes don't talk? But a talking snake deceived Eve, the woman. She went and deceived the man. Now, of course, the man should have been stronger, but that's, it's deception. You don't, you think it's a good and right thing, and it's not. But especially as it pertained to my dad, as he got older. Remember, after my mom died in 1982, see, my father, you can just tell people, which is a blessing, who's light, who's a curse, who is dark. So my father built everything with my mom. He had everything. My mom was the best woman you could imagine. My dad's last name means, DiBello means the beautiful. And my mom was beautiful both inside and out. And in many ways, so were my dad's, sisters and my mom's sisters, some of the godliest women I know. But after my mom died, Satan attacked, and this person, wanted to be with my dad for money so she could get power, use somebody, abuse them. Completely ungodly, unintelligent, other than being, an evil genius, if you will, which my dad said. My dad used to call her a pig whore bitch. I can understand that. She looked piggish. Her children did. She was whorish in that she used my father and other men for money. And a bitch, just in a sense, I hate to use that word, but it's, it just really means female dog. But somebody who's just downright mean, you know what I mean? Just cutthroat and ruthless, and, would do anything in a sense for, for her own purposes. But again, the females in my father's life, the two in particular, and here's kind of an update. I posted something, and if you want to see more of this information, you can either go to my Facebook page, and I've shared stuff that's posted anonymously on my dad's page, a couple of recent news stories, and I'm going to play one of the audio recordings, kind of, are predictable toward what was going to happen to my dad. And again, this woman was 21 years younger, poor. My dad was rich. She'd already been divorced, even though she lied, told everybody that her husband committed suicide. Maybe the fire that he died in, which is news to me. I got the news report, I think, late 1990s, she was responsible for the cover-up. I don't know. I don't know too many people who die in a house fire. Usually the alarm goes off, you get out. But, I don't know. But I'm trying to get it investigated, and I'll get into that. But again, 21 years younger, 25 pounds heavier, and just, completely evil and evil-minded. And, but she was able to deceive the other people in my father's life. From his second-born, Joseph, who was always been basically an atheist. His love is money. I mean, these people, and then the three girls in particular, all of them basically, I don't want to say dominant females, but control types, Lisa, Amy, in particular, are the two. Tony was too unintelligent and mentally, inept to lead anybody, including her own life. Julie, she was the nicest of them, and she probably leads her marriage with her husband. But she, just being nice knew enough to follow the leader, so to speak. Follow her dad, and sometimes for a while, follow my lead. Susan, born handicapped, grateful, God bless, she had, found somebody to marry her. But of course, Susan has to be compliant to her husband, but she's got a nasty streak in her, and and she can be quite mean, but thankfully she has. But again, when these people call themselves Christian, it's completely 90% of it is deceptive. But again, these other ones, Amy went through two husbands. Lisa's been living her lifestyle, if you want to call it that, for decades. No men, just women, roommates and such. I won't say more. And then Amy, I already mentioned that. But these, and I won't give too big a spiritual teaching, but the same with their, second-born Joseph, my dad and my mom, and here's just a couple of spiritual lessons real quick in the update. When I opened the prayer, just remember, I did it in the format that Jesus taught. Most people don't pray that way. First, you worship God. Secondly, you apologize, for being, sinful, which we all are. Thirdly, you're get the blessing to be able to ask for things. And then fourth, you ask to make sure that the devil, who is, the opposite of God, stay away from your life. But the number one thing that the devil does, basically one of the one things, beside being like the Bible even says, a liar and a destroyer, which means a murderer, is, and this is inherent in all beings basically. Number two wants to, instead of serving number one, they have the opportunity to, they want to overtake number one. See, the devil was God's number one angel, his most protective angel. But the devil wanted to be equal with God, thought he was equal with God, because remember, you can't surpass somebody until you're equal with them first. So here's God, here's the devil, but the devil wanted to be equal with God so he could ultimately overtake God. And, you see the same thing in families. Children want to overtake their parents, sons overtake their fathers, girls overtake their mothers, wives overtake their husbands, vice presidents overtake presidents in the political landscape of the last administration. You see it in siblings, second-born son wanting to take over first-born son. It's just the nature, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it's just complete disobedience and ungodliness. But it's this true in the lives of many of the women in my father's life. Not, again, not some of his sisters, but they were gone by the time, at least some of them, or at least, I don't know, Mary and Babe and Mary. Beautiful women, but I'll get to that. But I wanted to give that spiritual lesson really quick. And again, Satan's not, he's not going to change his ways. He knows to go to the woman to deceive the man. And, as much as I warned my father, I knew from the beginning he was being deceived by this person. I knew she was just in it for the money. She didn't have talent. She wanted just, the business she wanted to run was my father's, and my father, his life. That was her business. She thought of herself as a paid employee from the beginning, which she was. She was an employee, a paid caregiver, even a paid mate, paid to, even help him write his book, which of course is very biased, very inaccurate. I'm mentioned in it, I think once, maybe twice, all that I've done in my dad's life. But everything about her is wonderful in the book, when of course that wasn't the truth. But she had such control over my dad by then. And remember, as he got older, you're talking about somebody who's 21 years younger, 25 pounds heavier, more ruthless. And here's my dad, even many times at the end of his life, on a walker. So again, when the abuse had become physical, I didn't, know it was physical. I knew it was emotional. I knew it was verbal. I actually told you I heard a conversation where she's effing, telling him to effing sit down. He's not effing getting $200 of her dollars, which was all his money anyway. She wouldn't have had a nickel if it wasn't for my dad. He began giving her money the instant he met her. And she began just siphoning it off, secreting it away, stealing it in many cases, spending it certainly. And, when the abuse went from being, psychological, emotional, mental, verbal, to becoming physical, I really stepped in, because my dad, I heard her threaten him with a knife. I heard her, my dad told me, at least twice, once time in particular, she threw him down and broke his ribs. But then a second time, I filed I saw the police report. And again, I've noted this on the last message, and if you can find, I think I'll post, you'll see on Facebook, on my site, or maybe somebody, the anonymous source will post it on my dad's site, a report about her and this recent, tragic fire up at Saratoga Casino and the harness track. 17, I think, horses died. Beautiful little horses, beautiful horses. God's one of his favorite animal creations. But this person in my father's life hated animals. You recall me saying she's the only person I ever saw to kick Little Nugget. She couldn't have been happier that he died. She was even there to help bury him. And I remember my daddy, who always had critters. He actually kept a picture of little, he had 4 horses. He had a 5th horse, a racehorse he stabled in the barn on his property. But he had, critters, even doogies. We had Coco, we had Shimmy, we had Nugget. And my dad always had a picture of Nugget in front of him after little Nugget passed. But this woman, would even disallow. I said, Dad, you should at least have an animal to keep you company. You're alone and you're depressed because you're being abused. And she's out, according to my father, the pig whore bitch, having an extramarital affair, doing things with his money, secreting it away his money, just basically, on her list of top 10 things, he was not last on the list. Just keep him there as an ATM machine, just making sure he collects Social Security, 2 Social Security payments. One was $1,100, and the other one I think was like $618, $619. But anyway, so having said that, he said, Mark, I could never have an animal. She wouldn't allow it. One is she wouldn't spend $10 to feed a little doggy or a kitty, and two is she'd kill it. She just, and that, a lot of abusers are like that. They just hate animals, or they will kill them. So, she deprived my daddy of having any kind of animals for like 30 plus years. And he had animals all his life. Even when he was a little kid, he had a little doogie Renee. But anyways, but that's the nature of this spousal abuse. So I've been trying, again, as noted, and I'll play this recording here at some point, maybe at the end of this message, play the recording. But, I predicted that all this was going to happen. This wasn't hard to discern, again, because I happen to be the most godly, the most intelligent, and the one who loves my father and my mother the most. Loves God the most first, and then my father and mother, and even his brother and her brothers and sisters. But these other ones, these other people betrayed him in his life. They don't know God the way I know God. They're not as intelligent as, and again, not me in particular, let's say, or first and foremost, but my daddy. My daddy, I'm not a father, but my daddy is the best father you could imagine. I mean, he taught me everything. He loved God. He was highly intelligent. He had a huge heart. He loved his mom, my mom, his wife, Dorothy. He loved his children. He loved friends and family. He loved to work. He loved to help humanity. He loved animals. He loved, joy, peace. He was very much a peacemaker, very comedic. I mean, all these great qualities. But of course, after my mom died, this evil one, representative of Satan, one of Satan's agents, as I say, she came in and destroyed all of that, made sure she went through all the money, started, gaslighting and grooming my dad. His mind became fractured, never had Alzheimer's though. I have a recording of him saying how proud he was that the doctor told him, which I knew already. He was like in the top 5% of his age group mentally, and he never forgot anything. He was telling me stories from back when he was, a teenager, when he was 90, 89 years old. You know what I mean? So it's just ridiculous. But and again, remember, the two tenets or two keys to Alzheimer's is, one is you forget all those things. He never did. And, and not just long-term memory, short-term memory. My dad didn't, forget things short-term. He just became, and she made him become codependent on her. I'm like, Dad, he's like, Mark, what time is it? He'd even ask me, I'm like, Dad, look at your watch, look at the clock. But he was such in a habit of asking her. I'm like, Dad, you can't ask her for everything. And she, knew she was manipulating my father. I knew that, and always tried to prove that he had Alzheimer's, so she got a reason to do what she did. But the other thing is, it never got progressively worse. And that's why I knew it, because he had even said it on phone calls to me. Like, he'd open up every phone call to everybody for a year, more than that even, when I talked to him. He's like, first line in this conversation, Mark, no matter what I say, remember I have Alzheimer's. That's the first thing he would say in every conversation. Forgive me for what I say. Forget it. I'm going to forget everything I have. I mean, it was like gruel. He was so trained to believe that and say that. But of course, thankfully, I started talking to him, and he gave that up. He knew that wasn't right. He got off that, like deprogrammed. And I dealt with those things in ministry for 30, 40 years, cults and abuse. 30, 35 years, since like 1991. Yeah. So anyway, so having said that, my daddy was the godliest, most intelligent, most loving, and as was I. These other people, no, they all had gods before that. Her God, this one, Donna Murphy, her God was money, first of all, and two, her power and control in herself. Joseph, his God was money and being an atheist, and, he likes power, and remember, if you're an atheist, you believe your God, because you don't know what God is like. You only have your mindset, your rules, your belief systems. You don't even know the commandments thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, honor thy father and mother. And ladies, remember, if there's any females listening to this, because odds are, my guess is probably my detractors and my enemies are listening to this. And I'm going to be transparent. I have no reason to lie. But again, it's honor father and mother, not mother first. It's honor father and mother. And it's not it God or she God. It's, honor father and mother, because God is a father figure. And then Lisa, her, honoring her lifestyle, that's number one for her. And she's also a power. She's the dominant one, in her, female relationships. Brad, even music, nothing wrong with that. But again, you don't put it above God. And Brad was usually pretty neutral in all, kind of a very peaceful type of person, very mild-mannered, very, talented, as a good side to him, but also, I guess had a, dissension with my dad for many years. And I have to think that that was responsible because, did you see the kitty boy's tail? I think he wants to come over. All right, kitty boy, you're going to come over and be a good boy? He's got ADD, he needs attention. Oh, okay, you're going to sit down? All right, so I'll continue on. So Brad, Tony, of course, was, for a while alcohol, having a good time, whatever her, issues are. Come on, kitty boy. Amy, I already mentioned being a boss, manager, control, went through two husbands basically. Julie, her daughters, nothing wrong with wanting to be a mother, but you can't put your daughters, anybody ahead of God and ahead of honoring your father and mother. And even certainly your eldest, the eldest, their firstborn child, because if I don't come out right, I didn't do anything to do that. But if I'm not blessed to come out, well in a lot of fronts, they discontinue having children. So that's Julie and Susan, having to be her husband, and which I understand, it's good, to honor your husband, but again, not before God, or your version of God. Certainly not this woman who used and abused my dad. And then, it's just ungodly. But again, none of them are blessed to be as intelligent as I am, and none of them loved my dad the way I did because I just saw the way they treated him or the way they did other things. I'm like, he's going to be dead any day. You never know. He's 89. I started warning them when he was 80. I mean, I warned them all along. But again, they're all deceived. They all, chose her over my dad, definitely chose her over me. I mean, especially Joseph. I mean, no matter what I say, he thinks I'm a liar and a thief, and always doing evil, and the other ones, they're just the same way, basically. So anyway, having said that, here's, and this message isn't really pointed at them because there's other friends and extended family. My mom has two sisters remaining left alive. I used to think of them both as being saintly, but they've, whether, I don't want to say turn the other cheek, but they've turned a blind eye. They've also become, and my father even said to me sometimes, Mark, he goes, she's threatening, this Donna is threatening all of them. And I remember, she sent a threatening letter to my Aunt Helen, like my father would send a good birthday card, and then 2 minutes later, this Donna would coerce my father into sending a really evil one, or she would lie and just represent my father, misrepresent him, write something totally fraudulent and nasty and evil, because, again, this Donna had to have total allegiance, total control, and, anything that reminded anybody of my birth mother, my dad's true wife, given, his godly ordained wife, would be evil, because it's not, my mother was, the last thing my mother worried about was money. She didn't care about money. She that was, low on her list, and that's why they were so blessed to have it. They put it in the right perspective. Her, my dad worked for it, and my mom helped, and, my mom only was really, cared about God and her, the animal kingdom, even the plant kingdom, and their children and her family. I mean, my mom had the biggest, most beautiful heart. But anyway, this one is, like an antichrist, completely evil, completely demonic, completely the opposite. So, having said that, here's a couple updates. Let me see how long I'm going. Okay, I've got about 7 minutes. So I'm going to keep it to half an hour. So let me give you a couple updates before I play this recorded message. So, as mentioned, I tried to do everything. Of course, I was falsely arrested, 3 times because of this person. One, I said the story before, falsely accused me of stealing a truck, and she said I'd effing do it again. You and your father need to know I'm effing in control, and she used the F word. I own all this. She didn't say I'm going to. She said I own all this. I can't let you and your father think you're going to have any control, or take advantage of me. And I would effing, meaning lie, and have you falsely arrested again. The second time, my father, I was basically homeless because, of course, she took over my father's home, hated me the most because I most knew the truth. That's the way it goes. When when you have a person who knows the truth of what you're trying to do that's evil and points it out, a whistleblower, if you will, you want to get rid of them. So again, throughout the years, I was even disallowed from going on my father's property without being threatened with arrest. You believe that? My daddy's own house, that I helped him build, literally from the ground up as a 5-year-old, getting a rock dropped on my head. But again, that, this person was all about just using and abusing my father for money. But having said that, so I'm homeless, basically, and, there's more to it than that. But I mean, simply, my father had promised me like $500 to write a review for his book, which would have been a great, positive, Christian, spiritually minded review. Certainly trying to point out the positives of his work, which I was really proud of, his autobiography. But she, at the last minute, said, "No, I'm going to give 1,000 to this company called Kirkus, Jewish-run company." And so she spent 1,000 of my father's money on, and they ended up writing a negative review, panned my father's book. I mean, it's ridiculous. Of course, I was totally heartbroken and dejected, and betrayed. And I was basically, living in not living in a hotel, but came by a hotel to just get out of being, homeless in LA for, many years. And while I was in the hotel, somebody left an abandoned suitcase. It wasn't down where you would like check in your bag. It was up on one of the floors. And in LA, there's a lot of homeless, and there's, and I've left suitcases all over the place. I mean, that's what you do when you're homeless. So more out of curiosity than anything, I looked in the suitcase. I didn't, I didn't know if the person was going to come back for it or not. I didn't know if they abandoned it, whatnot. So as I went through it, I saw a credit card, and I'm like, oh, this is, part of me was even just looking to see if it even worked. But I also wanted to, I don't want to get my father's attention by saying, "Dad, you got to keep to your word when you help me, or I'm going to make a stupid mistake." And it was a stupid mistake. I went right to the whole hotel next door and used the credit card to get a room so I could take a shower and get a night's sleep in a bed for the first time in years. And sure enough, I got arrested. But it was stupid of me, but it's understandable. But again, she's in a sense responsible for that, and controlling and doing what she did and betraying my dad and me. Obviously, so I had to spend on and off for a year in like a rehab place, in and out of these shelters, and first it was jail, and then I got out of jail. I think it was 14 days in jail I had to spend, 11 or 14, something like that, maybe 13, and and that's hard. That's really difficult. Believe me, it's really it's you're suicidal most of the time. I mean, it's awful. Very deadly. But of course, she would do anything for money, including what she ended up doing to my father. So I've only got a few minutes left. And then the third arrest, of course, she took out a protection order when my dad reached out to me and said, "Mark, I got to leave her. I want to get a divorce." I said, "Dad, let's just get you out of there. Let's get you safe. Let the beatings stop. Her just, verbally abusing you. You can go on my father, on the Occult of One website. You can hear her finally trying to get my father's last Social Security money from him. So he can, he can't even eat. He's got to, beg for food. I'm sending him money. He's hiding in his Bible. She's taking that." But again, she didn't ask my father, didn't get, ask him how he felt about it. But she goes ahead and files a protection order, keeping me from my father and him from me. My even dad said it was ridiculous. Of course it is. It's evil. But that's what you do. You isolate and you make the victim codependent. So, and also along that lines, citing harassment because I'm using my First Amendment right to report crimes. That's harassment? No. Apparently, and of course she's got, friends in the judges, in the family court judge and the public defender. And again, I'm falsely arrested again. So here's the kitty wanting to have a little loving. See the kitty boy? All right, so let's see how long I got left. All right, so I only got a couple minutes left. So again, predictably, and it might go over by a minute, but I'll rush it here. So as I said, I knew she was, going to use and abuse my father till the day he died. Connive, destroy, misrepresent, fraud. I mean, all the crimes associated with abuse, assault, threats, basically it could be attempted murder. My father said she repeatedly threw a knife at him. I've heard her threaten him with a weapon. I've heard her, threaten his life. I mean, I've heard all this, and certainly enough, he dies under, and let me give you a little predecessant to it. And I told this story before. He's in the house that, she purchased with her money. His name's not even on the deed, disallowed from having even a car. Couldn't even have a key to the house. He had to depend on her to get in. She had an office upstairs. She kept locked. My father had to work on a little desk downstairs in his kitchen, in her kitchen, basically homeless. He didn't own the home. He had to depend on her. And because, I was the only one who wanted to take him in, she had to make sure that wasn't going to happen so she could make sure she didn't lose my father's last name or lose money in a divorce, and make sure she got all his Social Security benefits after he died and his life insurance. And life insurance, she said he never left. Now, she also didn't tell, which I also didn't get a copy of his will, and I know he left a will. So that in itself is a crime. So they can look it up, her supporters or whomever might watch this all you want. But I just realized and learned it's a crime in New York not to divulge a will. So I'll get that resolved. But what I'm also now trying to get resolved is to make sure I get buried, which it looks like I'm, law is also on my side, my mom and dad's side, because this is my mom and dad's request that I be buried next to them. But of course, she doesn't care. She'll leverage or, she'll ransom anything. She wants a grave plot sold, $800+, even threatened my father, to tell him to do it. But evil. And I just recently, you can look on Facebook, either I posted it or it was anonymously somebody, there was a written report on my dad's Facebook page about where she falsely accused me of stealing videotapes and a video recorder. My dad for a year gave me permission to borrow videotapes and then even offered me the recorder that was sitting right there, when we exited the rental home he had in East Greenbush. Of course, he had to pay for it, and she took advantage of it because it was closer to where she wanted to be. And as I'm walking out, he gave me the recorder to use, where it had one side you put in the VHS and the other side you put a DVD and transfer it. So he gave it to me. But of course, she gets on the phone with him, and next thing I know, he's causing a scene, screaming in front of Cracker Barrel, "Mark, you're stealing my possessions. You're stealing my possessions." Like, what are you talking about, Dad? But of course, she's got him brainwashed. She's screaming in his ear, threatening him, threatening me. I'm going to be arrested. Had total control over my father, total control over his mind, everything. That's what a cult leader does. And it's considered, spousal abusive relationships cult-like. You can look it up from the experts. So having said that, one of these, precursors to what was going to happen to my dad was, like I said, he was in the house. The fire alarm goes off. She's nowhere around. He said she's out either on vacation up in Maine or vacation, whatever, out gallivanting with her sister, out with other men having my dad said her sister, Ann, was also equally evil. An extramarital affair, or at Proctor's, trying to solicit rich people, the wealthiest people in Schenectady, to try to befriend them for money, or just doing whatever heck she wants. My dad's left alone. So the fire alarm was not maintained. It got clogged. Apparently the alarm reads it as being a fire and goes off. Now my dad, he didn't know what to do. He couldn't get the alarm off. He's stuck in the house. So thankfully I get him out, and I won't give all the other, sordid details of the story, but the moral of the story is, imagine if she had been gone, because she goes on these extended vacations and takes leaves my father in the morning with a plate of food and then goes all day and does her own thing. My father could have been stuck in the fire. Imagine if that thing gets clogged. She's all gone. My father, let's say he goes out for, some of the day, the batteries go dead and the fire alarm doesn't work. And there is a fire. My dad, always left alone during the week, would have died in a fire. So knowing that, I knew what was going to happen. I knew he's deteriorating. He's getting older. He needs care. He needs help. And remember, you're going to hear this message. So again, remember, they fought on weekends. She'd come back on a Friday night. She'd be, if my father needed help with anything, don't bother me. I'm tired. I did this. I went and babysat. I had my affair. I went and did, with my children. I went and spent your money. I went to Proctor's Theater to volunteer. Here's my father basically paying her to take care of him. And she's volunteering somewhere else because there's other rich people there. But anyway, so having said that, they would fight on Fridays, and they would definitely fight on Saturdays and Sundays, because on Saturday my father liked to play the horses. She didn't want to turn the TV on. I mean, I told you, I overheard a call where my father said, he said, because you don't turn the TV on when I ask you to, like if I just want to watch the races during the day, you're nowhere to be found, or you won't walk me through it. Can you turn the TV on for me, on the race channel in the morning, so when the races come on a couple hours later, I can watch them? She said to him, no. It's a waste of electricity because I'm not there. Do you believe that? Can you believe that? No, I'm not going to have you leave the TV on for 2 hours and waste money and electricity when I'm not there. How evil and self-centered does it get? Some of the only things my dad, you can hear the voice where he says, I don't do anything anymore. All I get to do is eat. Because he got down to that. And then again, on Saturdays, she would, she told him, you're not effing getting my $200. It was my father's $200. And my father always won playing horses. But again, she later, called my dad a degenerate gambler. Had one of my father's sister, my mother's sisters believing that lie. Now, of course, this one's brother, Peter, some ugly, fat, obese, degenerate guy who was nothing more than a short order cook or whatever he was. He died. He was a degenerate gambler, according to my dad. My dad was more worried about him than apparently, his own sister, and he ends up killing himself, this guy, but death is around this woman, Donna Murphy. This death is all around her. Divorce, death, strange deaths, if you will. So again, and then on Sunday, they'd fight because my father wanted to, invest in or watch football games, and my dad was always winning at football. I mean, he took all of my mother's family to Las Vegas for years. He always picked up the tab, at least most of the tab. Certainly at dinner, my dad's not going to let anybody else pay. All right, God bless. I had to pause the film, the content, the recording took up the space, storage space, so I had to offload it. So with this message at 35 minutes, I'm just going to wrap it up here. But again, as I was saying, they fought on weekends. I told you I had video of my father, her saying, "Don't show this video of your bloody nose," and to Mark, "You're going to get me in trouble." Every abusive tactic, a tactic of a spousal abuser, she would use. She has used. I've witnessed it. I'll put my hand on a Bible. I've heard it. I've recorded it. I'll take a lie detector. You can hear my father's own words. The only person who said she wasn't abusing him was her, obviously. And then, of course, all those, who she, was two-faced and, was just, especially the ones in my father's family, like Joseph, who had money. She still stands to make more money from him off Joseph. So, of course, she's going to, put on a facade for them. But behind the scenes, I knew what was going on. I knew it, and certainly enough, I got evidence of it, as my father's life, neared its end. But like I said, on, Easter Sunday or Saturday, Holy Saturday of the Catholic faith, an ambulance was called. What happened before during that week? Did she leave him on the ground? Did she hit him? What was this infection he had? Was she unreachable? Because again, it was highly predictable. Again, like I said, if my father wanted to do something on Sunday with football, no, you're not getting any money. It was all her money. That was the reason she married him, was for money. Number one, first and foremost, period. So, she always thought it was always her money, all her money. Any money I sent my father, didn't matter whether my father wanted to eat, buy a $1 lottery ticket, or a popsicle. He didn't have, she wouldn't, she controlled all the money. And certainly not to do some things he enjoyed, and you can even hear him say in the one message, you go everywhere, you do everything, I do nothing. He was livid, and I don't blame him. But anyway, so having said that, the ambulance gets called. When did she call it? After he started dying, after he was infected. My father also, and I have evidence of this. She was over medicating him. My father said two times he think he poisoned her. She poisoned him. She was giving. He didn't. I knew all these medications he was taking. Very, very. Not only criminal, sinful, certainly criminal, but certainly abusive. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book for an abuser. You give the guy something that makes his blood thin, and you give him something that makes his blood thick. You give him something that, called Prevagen for Alzheimer's. He doesn't have Alzheimer's. And Prevagen, this jellyfish thing, has been debunked by the FDA. And as soon as all that paperwork gets done, that thing will be off the market. But again, just making him codependent, like a drug dealer and a drug addict. My father, he had to depend for a place to stay, for a place to eat, and depend on not getting beat up, or roughed up by her. And again, I've heard it, and again, all of that is criminal. But again, what happened to him at the end of his life? And I just learned something on AI called intentional depravity murder. Intentional depravity murder. Did you abuse an elderly man in a walker and 21 years older, and that you had control of his mind, and deprived him of food and care, and hospitalization or emergency treatment care when he needed it? Did you hurt him? Did you cut him? Did you infect him? Did you poison him? You know what I mean? Did you punch him? And did you just let him lie there and suffer in bed like he's had on occasion? I've heard him before. Mark, I got to go to the doctor. She won't take me. I got to go to the dentist. She won't help me. She won't take me. Now, that's going to be, when I wrap up here, the recording you're going to hear, one of the recordings. Because again, remember, I'm discerning, getting all this evidence factually, firsthand, most cases, from my dad, or through, like I said, these 6 or 7, some of which I was able to record, accidental recordings of what was really going on behind the scenes. Not to mention, there's 2 or 3 at least domestic violence reports filed. And of course, my father would call, and like I said in the last message, he'd file the report because she was beating him up. And as soon as the people got there, she threatened my dad, lock him in the room, lie to the cops, and say, you know what? No, he was beating me up. Well, if that's the case, why didn't she call the police? No, my dad called the police to file the report. But this is as old as time, these abusive tactics. And of course, the people that went out to investigate, and even in one circumstance, my father said the girl, some young, overweight, middle 25-year-old black girl that my dad could hardly speak the English language, and she said this Donna gave her $20 and said, "Thanks for coming. Now go." That's illegal. But of course, it's all, in, like I said, if you're in a state, especially, like New York City, obviously I know it's not a state, but, in a city or a state like that's, run by, more feminine, that female empowerment, Democrat, minority maybe, I'm not trying to sound like a white supremacist, but it just happens these days, middle-aged white men who happen to be maybe good-looking, hard-working, in good shape, take care of their bodies, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs like my daddy, are health-conscious, stay in shape. They happen to be the more godly men. They're able to hear God better and more act like God would want a human being, male or female, to act. But no, in New York, most of the times, completely the opposite. And you see that on the political landscape. You see it everywhere. But of course, I warned my dad. I knew it. He knew it. He tried to escape this abuse, tried to get, have his life saved. So again, what you're going to hear in here, I'm going to insert, again, look at the things I'm looking at. She's nowhere to be found during the fire. She's nowhere to be found when he wants to do, first of all, forget she's anywhere to be found when he wants to do something enjoyable. You want to go to the Saratoga race course? You take the bus. My dad took a new Cadillac every year for like 20 years to the track. Took anybody and everybody who wanted to go. Nope. She's off in the car. The car she owned, wanted the grave plot sold so she could get a car payment made. And my dad would have to take the bus to go to his favorite place. 3 times on his last birthdays. 89, he didn't make it to 91. Oh, he did make it to 91. 89, 90, and 91. At least once was a police report filed, and I have 2 recordings, twice. No party for him, no honoring him, abuse. He wanted a piece of cake? No. He wanted a Stewart's brand root beer? No. Not even remembered. Dad, did she wish you happy birthday today? No. Did she do anything for you? No. What'd she do? Well, she wanted me to go to the doctors to get checked for my mobility, to make sure, to see if I still needed to walk or if I could walk properly. And that's what she told me, and I got there, and it was a secret, clandestine Alzheimer's exam again. Dad, where, again, she brought tape recorders to, get these things recorded. That's my father's birthday present, and she tells him to take the bus. She's not giving him a ride. The other birthday they fought, and the same on his 89th birthday. And here I am. All I want to do is have my daddy be celebrated the way he deserved. But these people, every person in my father's life, apart from this one guy, like I said, 10% of the time he was good. He helped. Maybe my one aunt, 10%. But no, they didn't care. They just didn't care. Out of sight, out of mind. And then all the ones who betrayed him. It had to be 8 against 1, 8 against 2, let's say 8 against 3. God, my dad, and me and my mom. So the 4 of us, one's God, is invisible, so to speak. My mom's already in the ground. My dad is ailing, and me, who's being arrested and jailed. And all of these other people saying, she's the best thing. She takes good care of him. Unbelievable evil. So anyway, in closing here, and I'm sorry I went over. I said I was going to go 30. I'll just hope it lasts around 40. I have been able to, again, it takes a while. I was able to file reports with the Schenectady Attorney General's office. I'm not hopeful, but I'm prayerful they do something. It's, again, it's going to be, it's much more difficult after somebody's been gone 2 years, especially when nobody wanted to do an autopsy. I requested it. They wouldn't do it. Joseph didn't want to pay for one. He wanted no contact, no drama. Certainly he wouldn't want to pay. He likes this Donna. He's friends with her. He believes in her. He trusts her. He loves her. Whatever. And he wants to give her $800,000 apparently in his will. A will he dangles over my head like blackmail if I don't, if I post the truth about Bingo City and I, again, help to protect him like my dad protected him, although he was really protecting, this Donna he was with, who my father told me, Miss Deal dealt the books, had control of the money, essentially embezzled. Okay, my dad told me, he confided in me. I knew it was going to happen. That's why I wasn't involved. Of course, Joey wants to blame the Republican government, who's not trying to steal the company from underneath my father and Joey. She screwed it up. She did it purposely. And my father admitted it to me. I knew it. He didn't. I knew it. He just had to pick the right time to tell me, so he wasn't getting beaten up. And that's why she was probably so vehement against me getting, duping those videotapes of, one of which was the news reports of Bingo City, because she didn't want that exposed. So again, all these things happening up to my father's, demise, destruction, demise, and death. Listen now to this message. And again, I've got many messages like this. Here's the conversation. My father, I'm in Nevada, he's called me. Again, my father was very, very healthy for his age, incredibly health conscious, sometimes to the point I do things like on a 90-10 scale. 90% my father did everything the right way, especially even being health conscious. 10% he was off was that he was a bit of a hypochondriac. If he hurt his fingernail, sometimes he'd think he'd have to go to emergency room. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little, but and he had a little thing for sugar. So if I divided up 5% each, but nothing. He wasn't over. He was never overweight, so he wasn't like downing cookies and candy for breakfast. Okay, but he enjoyed having something sweet after a meal, like we all do. Okay, but he was definitely health conscious. But again, certainly of his vision, which he was worried about losing, certainly all the things that she was, doing to, destroy him. But listen now to this. Again, I knew all this, and I warned everybody, and I warned the authorities. And again, people don't care, and they didn't care when he was alive. So I don't know how much they're going to care when he's dead. But again, I promised him I would do it. He asked me to. He said, "Mark, tell my story. Don't let her get away with it." I would do it whether it was if it was a stranger I knew, not a stranger, but let's say an acquaintance, or for strangers, for injustice in the world. I mean, remember, it's very depressing. Like a good mourning, like you're supposed to be depressed. It means you love somebody, or righteous anger. You know what I mean? Like if you saw, like I mentioned, this person kicked a little nugget. If you saw somebody kicking a dog, the little doggy dies, you might cry and be depressed. I don't want to see a little doggy die. Or you get angry. How can these evil people kick this little dog while he's down? And how can police or authorities or vets, whomever come by and do nothing to save a human being's life, especially my daddy? Not just because my daddy was a great one of the greatest, people might not believe it, human beings ever. My dad was amazing. He was amazing. But anyway, having said that, the anger, that he was under, the stress, such depression, he became suicidal. He was never suicidal. But anyway, so like I said, I knew he said, he goes, "Mark," he said a couple of things. He said, one, he said, "I'm only alive for my Social Security. When she starts making more money worth, I have more value dead than I have to her now alive, she will do me in. She will see me dead. She will kill me. As soon as the life insurance kicks in, my Social Security benefits, whatever." And number two, he said that if somebody doesn't take care of me, if somebody doesn't keep an eye on me, lets her get away with it, she will kill me. She will let me die. She will, she's destroying me slowly, Mark. I've got hundreds of messages of him giving this warning. And sure enough, that's what happened. So listen now to this message. I think I don't know the date. I think you'll read the date. I transcribed the date when I got this call. But here's my father calling me in Nevada to try to get to a simple eye appointment because he didn't want to lose his vision. For a while he thought he had glaucoma, or he might have glaucoma, or some, failing eyes. But my dad never even wore glasses. I don't think I never wore them for a distance. I think sometimes late he would periodically wear reading glasses, but usually not. He had great eyes, my daddy. But here he is wanting to go to, he thought it was a dentist, but because, again, she had him on such, puppet strings, he didn't know whether he was coming or going. But, and I know my daddy had dentures, so he didn't worry too much about the dentist as much as he certainly worried about the eye doctor. So, having said that, listen to this call. Like I said, just a foretelling of what did you think was going to happen on a Friday, a night, a Saturday, and a Sunday, when my daddy wanted to live, he wanted to talk to me. He would have wanted to on Easter Sunday. He would have wanted to do something with God or go to church, or, it's spring, so, it's not even really horse racing or football season. But he would have wanted to do something for joy, love, life, peace, and not be berated and abused and threatened and beaten up, and known that he was loved and cared for. So listen now to this message, and I'll come back following and leave a postscript here. But listen to this message of my father calling me, trying to get a ride to the doctor's office, and how, again, she's off doing any and everything else but taking care of my father. And again, I know deep down inside, just like my dad knew, just like God is telling me, to her he would be better off, especially when he was out of money, better off dead than alive, because she didn't want to bother him. She didn't want to have to take care of him. She didn't want to keep having to put up a front, do anything he wanted to do. She hated everything he didn't. She didn't like anything he liked. Football, she didn't do anything with football. Horses, hated horse racing. Pets, animals, enjoying. She did enjoy a good meal on her own with her friends, I'm sure. She went to nice restaurants without him. And I know she enjoyed shopping. My dad didn't really like shopping. He just, wear the same thing. They're just clothes. He used to like nice clothes, but he did it for work. But whatever, whether he wanted to enjoy nature, or the little squirrels coming up to the sliding glass door. She was trying to kill animals up at his property for years. But anyway, I digress. I don't digress, but I'm just making the point. So listen now to this message, and then I'll be right back. God bless.
Wait, son, I don't have time here. I don't have time to negotiate. I'm hurting, and the doctor's going to see me. She's talking to Julie, winning friends and losing people, winning friends. She wants me to talk to Julie. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
She wants me to talk to Julie. What is Julie going to do? I got to be at the doctor's in 15 minutes. No, I can't yet. So you call an Uber for me?
Yeah, I'll call an Uber for you.
It's 1375. You got to come here. I don't know what the address is.
Yeah, I know what it is. It's fine.
Huh?
I know what it is.
Okay. So I'm going to... All right, hold it. I'm going to ask her once more. I'm going to ask her just once more. If she says no, then you go ahead and make the call.
Okay.
I'll ask her once more. Are you taking me to the dentist? Are you taking me to the... No, Amy, I don't give a shit if you're talking about a car. I'm talking about my life, my face. You can't take me to the dentist?
It's the doc.
Take me to the dentist and leave me there. Just drop me off.
It's not
You
the...
can't do that. It takes you 10 minutes.
Dad, it's not the dentist. It's the eye doctor, right?
Right. Who you talking? Hi, Julie. Listen, Julie. All right, listen. She gave me an appointment shooting me in for my eye. I'm having trouble. I'm going blind in my eye. Go ahead. You're going to have to get an Uber because Donna needs to... Right, okay. I'm getting an Uber. Honey, listen to me. Taking care of what? Yeah, she is. Honey, listen. She's taking care of Tony. Tony's waiting by the car. There's nothing Donna can do here. And all I'm asking is, listen, she needs the phone. All she got to do is drop me off at the dentist. What's the big deal? All right, bye. Donna's pleading Julie's pleading Donna's case. So Julie said, call me an Uber. Just call me an Uber. That's fine. What'd she say? How do you know I don't know the address? Read it to her. Yeah, but the appointment is now. I won't make it. I'll have to call and reschedule with the doctor. Yes. No, I made it before the emergency. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Are you still here? You see what I have to do? Just cancel. Just call it. The doctor was in emergency. He agreed to see me. Well, I can't be there for the appointment. Which one? All right, you heard you. All right, then call the Uber. Call the Uber. Now, Mark is in... Wait a minute, Mark. All right, Mark, I'm going to hang up. There's no sense in hanging you on this, okay?
All right, Dad. Bye.
You hear me?
Yep. All right.
You hear me?
Yep. Okay. God bless.
That's Julie on the other phone. I don't know what she's trying to make, but this is stupid. If she just puts me in a car. All right. Call me.
All right, Dad. Bye.
All right.
All right. God
Mark?
bless. Yeah, I'll try to talk to you later. Okay.
Say again. All right. Okay.
All right, bye.
Okay, you hear that message? I know all this. He's calling me, and I would have done anything for my dad, and I didn't do enough. I did everything. I mean, God, I would rather be in jail and have him be alive now than me not be in jail and him be dead. I would much rather be in jail. I don't care if you put me there for 20 years and if he gets to live another 20 years. Maybe I could have gotten out early. Maybe I could have helped him. Again, I'm being falsely accused and falsely arrested, but that's okay. I've got a predecessor that happened to named Jesus Christ, somebody I believed in. I believe is the best human being ever to live, even if, whether you believe he's the son of God or not. I mean, I also love Muhammad in a lot of ways. I love Buddha. I love the Hindu faith. I love Moses, Abraham, King David, Adam. I love a lot of godly human beings. I love, all the animal kingdom. I don't eat them. I don't kill them. I don't go out to dine them, and destroy them, But having said that, you hear that message? That's just that. What did you think was going to happen when my father was getting near his death, when he really needed help, more help? You get older, you need more help. You become more infirmed, more sickly, more in danger. And again, the lower his money got, the worse his treatment got. The more she got exposed to doing, ungodly, immoral, criminal things, the more, his life was in jeopardy. My life was in jeopardy. The more lies, the more frauds, the more false accusations, the more, depravity and duplicity on her part. Anything to keep money, power, and control. And, of course, stay out of jail. Point the blame at me. Point the finger at my father. She called my father a liar. I want you to find, anybody who's watching this, you tell me if you can remember a time my father ever lied. The only thing he did was once I remember he got wrong. Maybe he got wrong. He still believes it, I guess, that she murdered her first husband. And maybe it's true. But I sense maybe he was just misinformed or he misread the information and he was just overly concerned and cautious and, and more of a cry for help because she was destroying him, beating him up. She was going to kill him. They had knife fights. Do you understand? So anyway, like I said, I filed, I got maybe the Schenectady district attorney looks. They can consider this a deposition if they want. The information, a lot of it, and this new revelatory phone call was emailed to them. All the information is at markanthonydibello.com on the projects page, again, under a cult of one. And again, I've got much more evidence. I'll put my hand on a Bible, on a lie detector, that, again, what happened to him was quite possibly, quite probably, certainly ungodly and sinful. Abusive, usury, evil, I already said that, abusive, but 90% odds probability it was criminal. It was criminal when he was alive. Why wouldn't it be criminal when he lost his life? Again, deprived, intentional deprived murder, deprivation murder, or assault, manslaughter, abuse, whatever, poisoning, whatever, neglect, certainly, all the financial crimes. She reported that he's, to others, including my Aunt Mary, that, my dad left no life insurance. Well, my dad told me otherwise. Maybe it got sold while she had him sell it while he was alive so she could profit. I don't doubt that. I think that there's a possibility that is what happened. But he also knew, like I knew, what do you think she was doing in this office of hers all day? Taking out life insurance policies, taking out insurance policies, taking, his veteran benefits. Like I said, $1,800 cumulative. I mean, that's all he was to her, was an ATM machine. One she could use and abuse and take advantage of. Well, again, prayerfully, there's a new president in office. Maybe in a jurisdiction that's not New York, where a lot of this abuse happened, Florida, they did come to Nevada, I witnessed it. So maybe, and if it doesn't get done in Schenectady through the AG's office, I will take it to the, U.S. Attorney General. I will not quit. I will love my dad, not until the day he dies, but until the day I die. I will get justice for him. Not only, like my dad said, to protect other men in the world, other people, whether he likes it or doesn't know it or not, Joseph, because again, she'll stop at nothing if she knows he's on his will to get that money, and again, she kind of has the same statute in the sense that if Joseph dies first, she'll be able to collect. And this guy's on her side. I mean, so he's got to watch out in many ways. Again, and I certainly have to watch out. You know, anybody, if there's children of Joseph's who are each going to get, like, according to him at this point, $800,000, which is more, you know, God bless him. I mean, I don't agree. Just all he did was, you know, collect money for most of his life, but that's okay. He has blessings, but 90% this guy is evil and ungodly and wrong. But 10% hardworking, like, you know, has given me some money in the past, so I appreciate that. You know, was an athlete a while back, but now, like my dad said, Mark, money changes people. But this guy, I mean, everything I do is evil according to him, and he's always falsely and wrongly accusing me. And, you know, he lives for money. That's his God. And again, he disowned and betrayed and left my father for dead, basically, and trusted her, which was a mistake, obviously. And it betrayed me. He told me he would help me and my father. But then he, again, listened to his sisters or whomever that family, that cult family they're in. You know, and like I said, all those people. But again, so in closing, and again, I'm sorry I went over. Let's see what the AG does in Schenectady. I'll find, you know, somewhere, somehow, because again, remember, courts of law base themselves basically on three things: the better liar, the better lawyer, and the person who's more liked. Female judges tend to like female defendants. Females in a court of law in this kind of case will lie. I'll tell the truth, but that doesn't work. You got to lie. I won't, but they lie. And three, the lawyer. She's friends with this public defender, Ruth Tompkins. There's Ruth Tompkins. How many public defenders write, you know, an obituary saying, "Oh, you know, Donna, I'm sorry for your loss." Crooked. All of them in that area, crooked, and they all have blood on their hands for the destruction of my daddy and having me falsely accused and falsely arrested and defrauded, you know. But again, let's, you know. And again, if you have Democrat values instead of Republican values, but again, there's, you know, I'm not saying it's an absolute. Nothing is in a sense like that. I mean, maybe there's one good, godly person. This Attorney General, I don't know. You know, this Letitia James, you know, she can't, you know her issues with, you know, dominant white males, if you will, like President Trump. And again, so we'll see. I'll find somewhere, you know, an honest court that, you know, believes in, you know, the rule of law, evidence, justice, you know, protecting other men or, you know, anybody, this, you know, from this Donna person and the crimes and the, you know, injustices that she caused to my daddy and me, you know. And in some ways, again, while they're gone, I am the eldest firstborn child of my mother and father. So in some ways, you know, I have an obligation, duty they'll never have. These people will never understand what it's like to be the eldest child in their family. And in a way, I don't want to say to protect them, but to at least show them the truth, which I've always done. You know, at least not always, but let's say the last 30 years, 35 years, since I had, you know, my spiritual, let's say, you know, awakening, never lied to any of them. But again, you know, maybe they'll see the light one day, get their evil ways corrected. But again, I have a litany of, you know, on the 90-10 scale, they're all 90% evil. 1/10 of, I have 10 stories that are, you know, 9 are evil, 1 is good. Julie, maybe 8 and 2, okay? But again, they're all getting worse. I don't know any of them that's getting more godly or doing even the simple commandment of honoring God and honoring their father, or, you know, my father and mother, because basically my mother and dad are rolling in their grave what these people have allowed to happen to not only him, but the memory of my mom and to me. So again, we'll see what happens with the court of law. I also, again, you might see this report regarding these deaths of these horses, which she very well could have done. It is certainly her MO, modus operandi, you know, with things that go on and trips to the casino up there and just dislike of horses and, you know, making money and life insurance, you know, insurance policies, traveling from Schenectady on vacation through Saratoga up to Maine, you know, her involvement with DiBello Racing, whereby even Joe DiBello, you know, I tried to correct it once, but the misspelling of DiBello, small b, D-I, small B-E-L-L-O, that's not how you spell my father's beautiful name. It's D, capital D, small I, B as in boy, E-L-L-O. DiBello, the beautiful. I mean, that's, if it's a DiBello Racing, you should at least have the, you know, the veracity, the truthfulness, the accuracy, the dignity, the respect to spell, you know, the name my father lived and died to give you, you know, but to all of them. But we'll see. So that's the update. God bless. I'm sorry I went over. God bless. I'm Mark Anthony DiBello. Peace.